Something I wanted to talk about today that I haven't yet, and I really wanted to mention it, who cares, is codependency and like detoxing from a toxic relationship, especially with PTSD, and how to find inner peace, really, because I know it was something that I was foreign to coming out of the relationship. Although I knew that I had been affected by the relationship, I had not known quite how, because certain coping skills had become normalized that I hadn't quite grasped that they were not normal behaviors. So it took a lot of like strength and recognition and self-observation to be able to identify those things. Honestly, with a little help from Anne-Marie, my mother, the woman I lived with for way too long outside of this relationship, who tried to destroy my life. If she wasn't so hypercritical of me, I might not have picked it up, but just saying, I like to find positive in all things. So like one of the things was like leaving lights on in a room. I don't know if that's related. I think it was just a personal problem maybe. But either way, I would always leave on the sink, the water running in the sink, and I couldn't figure out why I was doing it, because first of all, it's wasteful. Second of all, she would yell at me all the time about it, and so I'd feel worse about it. And third of all, I wasn't aware quite of what I was dealing with at that time. So the reason it turns out, and I think this is important for understanding PTSD, is understanding why you're doing a certain behavior. So I had to reflect back on the relationship. And I recalled, because we had 2 young children, an infant and a newborn, actually, before I left. But I guess by the time I left, I had an infant and toddler. Anywho, my ex would always run the water as a way to drain out the noise, because we were always fighting, right? And we didn't want to wake the kids because I would interrupt the fighting. So it took, I didn't realize that was like a habit that I picked up while I was in this relationship, until it was brought up very much to my attention when I lived with my mother, just briefly, or Anne-Marie, whoever that one was, stole from me. Anyways, so for PTSD, I think for me, what helped was understanding, observing the behavior, observing other people outside of a toxic relationship, and having self-awareness. So I identified that I was leaving the sink on, but it wasn't solving the problem, and I couldn't figure out why. So then I had to figure out why I was leaving the water running all the time. Oh, because of the fighting. So that was kind of a flashback that my body was autonomously doing as it was remembering, because it was still stuck in the survival mode. So once I figured out why I was doing it, then I was like, oh, well, I can stop and observe the behavior of myself and understand why I was doing it, because it was a trait that I picked up from the relationship. And then I can explain to myself that it's not normal, and then I can make a different decision. But it's that matter of being able to observe and identify the behavior and why you're doing it that forces you to have a moment of reflection for where you can make a different decision. Because this was becoming a problem when I was living with Anne-Marie, because she was always yelling at me about it, and I didn't want to be yelled at. This also translates into less desirable coping skills, such as drinking or use of marijuana, both of which I do tastefully here and there, but not frequently like I used to, because I used to depend on it to escape. And instead, I did 3 EMDR therapy. Actually, before I did EMDR therapy, I think my body kind of naturally started doing this when I was pregnant, was kind of going to a safe place, or literally having to take a vacation in my head. At my worst in this relationship, much before I had children, 2020, when he actually did assault me, and was charged, but those charges got dropped. Sorry, it's true. Anywho, I was drinking my worst, but that's when the worst manipulation was going on because of that court case back in 2020. And I went to him at that time and I said, I think I'm mentally insane, blah, blah, blah. And he still uses that against me to this day. Turns out it's not. It was just a domestic violence situation, and I was uneducated on domestic violence at that time. But I had picked up a poor drinking habit. Now, this didn't affect me when I was pregnant, thank God. Uh, but after I left my ex, after I left my ex, that's not even his real name or whatever. But after I left my ex, officially in 2024, after several attempts and having 2 children, drinking was like on and off. But he drank all the time. At his worst in 2020, he was drinking a half gallon of scotch. Your girl was putting down like a fifth. It was not impressive. So my body started to remember that when I was outside of that environment, finally, when I officially was able to leave. I mean, I was able to handle it. Like, I found other things, like, I got really into, like, making jewelry when I was pregnant, actually. So I think that kind of, like, what's the word? Substituted for, like, because I'm pregnant. I'm not going to drink or smoke when I'm pregnant. You know, I'm not perfect, but that was, you know, that's what every pregnant person should do, is try to be their healthiest self, especially since I was in extreme high stress. I definitely tried very hard to focus on that, and I did it pretty successfully. But when I, you know, because I had my 2 children, I first tried to leave them in 2023. Couldn't do it. Tried to serve him PBO. Him and Anne-Marie hooked up and did some weird things to try to infiltrate me for money, of course. So I had to go back because I was trying to go back to school, and I was pregnant, and I had an infant at the time, so I knew I couldn't leave. And then all of a sudden, nobody had a problem with me once I was, like, complicit with living with my ex again and having 2 children. But I had always planned on leaving at this time. I just knew I couldn't do it while I was pregnant. Anywho, flash forward to 2024, I get a PPO again. I'm able to serve it to him this time, thankfully. And I did not anticipate Anne-Marie sabotaging me or not being able to handle 2 young, an infant and a toddler, moving in with her when she's single and alone. I did not think about, because she convinced me it was going to be okay, but and she sounded like she would be strong enough to do it, but I was wrong. It was not okay. Anywho, I resorted back to drinking, and I couldn't figure out what it was about drinking, but I realized it was just a survival skill. So, knowing that, I was able to observe the absurdity of the behavior, largely due to Anne-Marie. Although she criticized me in anything, I'm not sure if it was much of a problem as she loved for it to be. Either way, it was causing tension in my relationship with her, which was making it difficult to be a parent to my children. But I couldn't figure out why I felt like I needed to drink. It almost was like I was trying to understand something about that drinking behavior. And because I hadn't gone to my EMDR therapy yet. So once I observed the absurdity of the behavior due to my relationships around me, I was able to see that it was not right and that there was a reason I was probably doing it. So then once I figured out why I was doing it as a coping survival skill, my body was like used to doing that in high conflict to escape before I had, you know, my safe place to vacation in my head. Because although I did do that when I was pregnant at one point, it wasn't like a clear defined coping skill for me yet. Once I got into therapy and I started doing the EMDR and I started learning about these coping skills, it made much more sense to me why I was doing that. And then I was able to overcome that kind of desire to drink, because it didn't feel like I needed the alcohol, but it felt like I needed it in a weird way. Once I was able to identify the behavior, understand why I was doing it, I was able to control it. So that's my little tidbit. Hopefully that helps somebody out there who's dealing with escaping a toxic relationship, because it's crazy. Okay, bye.